Lone Survivor is a survival horror game, apparently made by just one guy by the name of Jasper Byron. It reportedly took him 4 years to assemble, and the result of those 4 years, released only mid last year for the PC, although not exactly a revolution for the genre, is one of the best and most intriguing horror games I have played in years, and possibly for a long time to come. The scenario is quite traditional for the genre, but with a slight twist that takes a cue from the likes of Eternal Darkness. You are placed in the role of an unnamed man who was apparently the only survivor of a devastating infection that has turned the rest of the population into what can only be described as flesh-hungry zombies. Realizing that he can't just remain in the apartment forever, he sets off to find a way out of the apartment complex and ultimately out of the city, all while dodging the world's monstrous inhabitants who want nothing more than to kill him and nom on his brains. Unfortunately for him, you start to see early on that he has a lot more than just the monsters outside of his apartment to worry about. You see, presumably because of his situation, a few nuts and bolts appear to be coming loose in the old noggin, and he's slowly starting to lose his marbles, as you'll see through weird events that manifest throughout the game. Add to that encounters with various strange and mysterious characters throughout the game, from a man with a box on his head, to people who are just a little bit too chilled out, and your character is left wondering exactly how much of what he sees is real, and how much of it is in his head. Although I don't want to risk ruining it by saying any more, not only does this situation make for a really tense and perhaps genuinely unnerving horror experience as you play, it makes for a fantastic and involving story, whose protagonist you might actually end up caring about. By the end, it might not make sense to some people, but to those willing to put in some thought, Lone Survivor has an intriguing storyline. As fantastic as the story is though, it obviously wouldn't mean anything if the gameplay weren't any good, but thankfully, the gameplay is awesome. First of all, I find the situation you're in here quite refreshing, because it goes back to what I personally consider a proper horror situation. Unlike most horror games these days, which let's face it are just action games masquerading as horror, you are not clad in advanced sci-fi armor, nor are you a hulking mass of muscle, who is clearly also a steroid abuser with enough weaponry in your pocket to fight a small army and the agility and reflexes of a cat. Instead, you're just a normal, everyday guy, with no special skills, no shoes, and only a surgeon's mask, a poxy handgun, a torch, and a few other little things you find here and there to help you get by. And before someone else says it to me, no, it's definitely not a smile, it's definitely a surgeon's mask. I mean, come on, do you seriously know someone who smiles like that? If you do, oh fuck me, they need to see a doctor. The game takes place in a 2D side-scrolling perspective, and if you've ever played an old-style Resident Evil or Silent Hill game, then you'll have a pretty good idea what kind of experience you're in for here. From your apartment, which acts as your central hub, and it even contains a radio that you can tune into for hints, you have to navigate the dark apartment complex and eventually the city outside, all while dealing with zombies and of course solving the occasional puzzle here and there. The puzzles are nothing too special, they're just a case of find and collect a number of items X, and use them in place Y to proceed further, and you'll also constantly find locked doors blocking your path, which require you to find a key or some other method of getting them open. Basically your typical tried and tested manner of controlling where you can go at any one particular point. It's all simple, solid stuff. The only problem is that the puzzles are a bit vague about how many items you need to collect to accomplish the puzzle. This can be a little bit frustrating, but other than that, nothing that should present you with much trouble. How you deal with zombies is a little bit more interesting. They are basically your typical zombies. They aren't too smart and they'll give chase if they see you, and there's a couple of different ways to deal with them. Most of the time you can avoid them by using special hiding spots which hide you in the shadows and allow you to pass unseen, and if you're having trouble getting at those spots you can lay down rotting meat to lure their attention to make it easier to get by them. But sometimes it's not always easy or even possible to sneak by them in this manner. In such circumstances, you've got two methods at your disposal. You can take a non-violent approach by dropping a flare, which will stun everything on screen allowing you to run past, or you can just whip out your handgun and blow their brains out. Or you could do one then the other. Apart from one or two situations here and there, the game doesn't really force you to pick one approach over the other, so it's up to you. There is a reason why you should care, which I'll get into in just a bit. Whichever approach you use, you still need to be careful. As I've already said, your character is not the modern Superman idea of a horror protagonist. If something goes wrong, it won't take many hits from a zombie to bring him down, but it will take a lot of bullets to bring them down, and you can't just karate kick your way out of things here. and although there are ways to restock them, bullets and flares are not always in plentiful supply when you need them. I know I'm just covering old ground now, but after the likes of Resident Evil, it's really refreshing to see such a protagonist in a horror game. The fact that you are so vulnerable gives a genuine note of tension to dealing with the monsters, which I just haven't seen in the majority of modern horror games, since you're constantly aware that if it goes wrong, you can't just round kick your way out of it, so you're probably fucked. And frankly, I think that's how a horror game should be. As well as dealing with zombies and exploring your surroundings, you'll also have to tend to your character's basic needs, which come in the form of food and sleep. Now, sleep is just a simple matter of return to your apartment and go to bed, which also saves your game, by the way. No matter how far you roam, there is nowhere else in the game that this guy will go to sleep, so it's fortunate that there are mirrors dotted around the game which allow you to warp to your apartment and then back to where you left off, so his need for sleep doesn't hinder your explorations. As for food, you'll come across various edible items in your travels. Some can just be eaten on the spot, others require preparation in your apartment, and some foods you find are clearly less healthy than others. It's really up to you if you feed him healthily or badly, or let him sleep, or just dose him up on coffee or drugs to keep him going that little bit longer, but you do need to care about how you treat him. Remember I said that he seems to be losing his marbles? The way you treat him directly affects your mental health score. Eat good, healthy food, go to bed when you need to, well, that has a positive effect. But on the other hand, feed him total crap or use drugs to keep him going a bit longer, well, that's going to have a negative effect. Seemingly everything you do, including whether or not you shoot zombies or use flares on them, seems to have an effect on this score. The list of actions that affect it seems to be a mile long, literally. If you can interact with it, it seems to have an effect. There are even optional missions here and there that affect it, depending on how you go about them or if you even bother with them. Personally, I love this feature. Your character's mental health doesn't actually affect gameplay. I've played through it twice now, and apart from minor responses to certain things here and there, events appear to play out the same whether his mind is stable or not, which is a bit disappointing, since anyone who's played Eternal Darkness knows that it would have been a great chance to screw with your head. But his mental health score at the end of the game does dictate which of 3 endings you'll get. So although it misses a trick by not taking a chance to fuck with your head, that can be forgiven since it's flipping awesome anyway, and the endings themselves are worth getting if you can get into the story. So it is worth keeping all this mental health stuff in mind as you play, and potentially extends what is otherwise a 3 to 5 hour game as you experiment through 2 to 3 different playthroughs to see what kind of actions trigger the endings. Just as a quick note, when I started recording the review, I read that there will be more content added to the game soon, including more endings. Now, nothing is perfect, and although largely solid, there are a few negative points that, although not even remotely game-breaking, do need to be highlighted. For starters, gunplay is quite awkward. It's quite simple, all you have to do is press a button to go into gun mode and take aim. Unfortunately, whilst your pistol is out, your character becomes stuck facing one way, and won't turn around until you put the gun away, which needless to say is a bit problematic if you're taking on more than one zombie. The other problem is the map. Although you play from a side-on perspective, your map is in a top-down perspective. This conflicting combination causes confusion, and makes it very awkward to navigate your environments, and as a result, you're often going to get lost going one way when you thought you were actually going the other way. It's a pain in the arse, and a real fucker during a certain chase sequence, as you end up getting trapped in dead ends that you didn't realise you were heading for. Again, not game-breaking, but something to keep in mind. Last but not least are the graphics and sound. The visuals are admittedly not quite what you expect from a horror game, and unfortunately this causes certain gamers to immediately judge the game as not worth bothering with. But if you're one of those gamers, then you've just made a mistake. I think the choice to go 2D was a brilliant idea. The graphics are simple, but at the same time really detailed, and they fit the image of a battered and broken post-apocalyptic world really well, adding to the game's atmosphere and emphasising that this is not a horror game aimed at simply grossing you out. And the sound complements the graphics really well. The sound of zombies shuffling around and the blood-curdling scream they emit if they spot you really helps to add to the tension as you trope around. And finally, the music is also very good. It's kind of a mixture of full-fledged tracks, ambient atmospheric tracks, and just essentially background noise. Whatever the nature of the track in question, it all fits in with the game perfectly, whether that's providing tension, calm, or just keeping out of the way, and is generally really well done, and the title and end credit musics in particular are really well done. So there you have Lone Survivor. It's not exactly revolutionary, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a breath of fresh air. In a genre that's dominated by action horror, this game sticks to what I think makes horror, horror. With an intriguing deep story, creepy atmosphere, and good old-fashioned zombies and puzzle solving, mixed in with the interesting idea of caring for your character's mental health, for £7 you can't really go wrong with this game, and fans of horror should really enjoy it.